So today we're going to do a deep dive into this pretty interesting book. It's called The Gods Among Us, an Unfiltered Revelation. And it's written by this guy, Conrad Riker. It's all about like how people think about God, like how that's changed in different cultures and over like all of history now.
Yeah, the book is pretty cool. It doesn't like hold back or anything. Riker just comes right out and says how he thinks like culture and politics have like messed with how we think about God. And like we don't even realize it, you know?
Yeah, he's definitely not afraid to say what he thinks, especially when it comes to this thing he calls cultural Marxism. But we'll get to that later. First, let's go back to like the beginning. The book starts with the Sumerians and all their gods.
Right. The Sumerians, they had like a whole bunch of gods for everything, like forces of nature, human stuff. You know, one of the big ones was Enlil. He was the god of storms and war. And he was like a really powerful dude, sometimes like kind of scary.
And then there's Enki. He was the god of like wisdom and fresh water. More of a good guy, you know?
Yeah, and their relationship is interesting. Like, it's this thing you see all the time in mythology. This balance between, like, opposite forces. You got Enlil, power, destruction. And then Enki, wisdom, creation.
Like they were trying to figure out, like, how the universe works.
Exactly. And it's not just guys, either. Ninhursag, she was the mother goddess. She was a big deal in Sumerian mythology. Creation, fertility, healing, all that.
Riker says that, like, kind of proves that ancient religions weren't all about men. She's powerful.
Yeah. She adds a whole other layer to what we think about Sumerian beliefs. So moving on from Sumeria, Riker takes us to ancient Egypt. Their gods were like way more connected to everyday life. One of the most important ones was Osiris. He was the god of the underworld and the afterlife.
Osiris is like all about death and rebirth,
Yeah.
which was like the most important thing to the Egyptians. They thought when you died, Osiris would judge you. And then you'd either go to the afterlife or like be stuck in darkness forever.
Yeah, and to get through the underworld, they had all these rituals and spells. They even wrote them down in this book called The Book of the Dead. It was like a guidebook for dead people. Told them how to get to paradise.
Wow, they thought of everything. There's this one ritual, the weighing of the heart. They'd weigh your heart against a feather. The feather was like truth and justice. If your heart was lighter, you were good to go. But if it was heavier, this monster would eat it. That meant like you were gone forever.
That shows how important being a good person was to the Egyptians. It wasn't just about making the gods happy. It was about living a good life so you'd be judged well after you died.
Okay, so we got all these gods in Sumeria and Egypt. But then Riker takes us to like a huge change in religion. The start of monotheism.
Right? One God. This is where the Abrahamic faiths come in. Judaism, Christianity, Islam. They all believe in one God. Not a bunch of gods for different things, just one all-powerful God. He created the universe and everything in it.
That like totally changed how people saw themselves and God. It wasn't about making a bunch of gods happy anymore. It was about worshiping and obeying this one God.
Yeah, one of the most important stories in the Abrahamic faiths is in Genesis. It's the story of creation. God made the world in 6 days and then rested on the seventh.
That story is like the basis of the whole relationship between God and human. God's the creator and we're his creation and we're supposed to live the way he wants us to.
Riker points out that this idea of one God who knows everything and can do anything can be like comforting but also scary.
Yeah, totally. It's good to know there's someone looking out for you, but it's also like, what if you mess up? He sees everything you do.
And Riker gets into all that, how different people within these religions see God. Some see him as angry and vengeful, like in the Old Testament. Others see him as loving and merciful, like through Jesus Christ.
Speaking of Jesus, Riker talks about the proof that he actually existed. He mentions this guy, Flavius Josephus. He is a Jewish historian who lived like right after Jesus died. And he wrote about Jesus, so that means he was a real person.
That's a big deal. It shows that Jesus wasn't just made up. Whether you believe he was God or not, he was a real guy.
The story of his life, it's had a huge impact on the world. Like his birth, his teachings, being crucified and coming back to life. It's the basis of Christianity, and it's inspired so much art and music and stuff.
Yeah, and Christianity spread really fast through the Roman Empire, mostly because of people like the Apostle Paul. He traveled all over preaching and starting churches, even though people were trying to stop him.
And eventually, Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire. That was under Emperor Constantine the Great.
Yeah.
It was a huge change. Christianity went from being illegal to being the biggest religion in the West.
And even within Christianity, there are all these different interpretations, different groups and denominations. They all have their own ideas about God, the Bible, and how to live your life. Riker talks about all these different versions of Christianity and how the idea of God has changed over time.
So we started with all these gods in Sumeria and Egypt, and now we're at monotheism with the Abrahamic faiths. It's crazy to see how the idea of God has changed so much.
Yeah, it's one of the most basic human ideas, that there's some kind of power out there that controls everything. And Riker does a great job of explaining all this history, and he makes you think about how these old beliefs still affect us today.
So we've seen how the idea of God changed. from those old pantheons to the one God idea. But Riker says it didn't stop there. It's still changing today. And he thinks some pretty powerful stuff is messing with it.
Yeah, that's a big part of the book. Riker gets into this whole cultural Marxism thing, says it's like twisting how we see God and religion. But it's a term people use a lot, so it's good to know what he actually means by it.
Yeah, I gotta admit, I wasn't really sure what it was before I read this. Can you give us a quick, explanation?
Sure. Basically, Riker says cultural Marxism is like a way of looking at the world. It wants to tear down all the traditional stuff in the West, like our values, institutions, even religion. He says it comes from these Marxist guys like Antonio Gramsci. Gramsci said that to have a socialist revolution, you got to change the culture first.
So instead of focusing on the economy, they go after things like schools, the media, even religion to change how people think, right?
Exactly. Riker says they push these ideas like moral relativism, multiculturalism, radical feminism. He thinks they're using them to break down the old hierarchies, the power structures, including, the authority of religious institutions.
Okay, so how does this connect to God then?
Well, Riker says they're basically trying to create a new religion, a secular one. It replaces faith with believing in social justice and progressive values.
Whoa, that's a pretty big claim. What proof does he have for that?
He points to things like trying to reinterpret the Bible from a feminist perspective, like saying Jesus was all about social justice, or using religious language to promote stuff that has nothing to do with religion. He thinks they're trying to use the power of religion for political reasons.
I see what he's saying.
Right, and Riker's worried that this is going to make our values decline and weaken the stuff that used to uphold those values.
But couldn't you say that some of these new interpretations are just reflecting how society is changing?
That's a good point. Riker knows that religion has always evolved, over time and in different cultures. But he thinks cultural Marxism is way more radical. It's intentionally trying to destroy the foundations of the West, including religion.
Okay, I'm getting it. But this cultural Marxism thing, it's pretty controversial, right? Not everyone agrees with Riker.
Definitely not. Lots of smart people say there's no such thing as a cultural Marxist agenda. They think Riker's making it too simple, like he's blaming everything on this secret conspiracy.
So we should probably be careful about just believing everything he says. It's good to know there are other opinions out there.
Right, but even if you don't agree with everything, I think Riker makes us think about some important stuff, like how religion, culture, and politics all connect in today's world.
Yeah, it makes you realize that how we see God is being influenced by stuff all around us, whether we know it or not.
Now, moving on from that, Riker also looks at other ways the idea of God has changed. One really cool chapter is all about different ideas of the afterlife.
Oh yeah, that was interesting. He goes through all sorts of beliefs about what happens after you die, like the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the Christian heaven and hell, Hindu reincarnation.
It's amazing how different they are. Like the Egyptians, they had all those tests and judgments in the underworld.
And they were really focused on this life, They thought you needed your stuff, even your servants, in the afterlife.
Yeah, they even had spells to keep your body from decaying, so your soul could find it again.
Then there's Christianity. Heaven and hell, totally different. You get rewarded or punished forever based on what you did in this life.
That idea of final judgment has really shaped Western culture.
Yeah, it makes you think about right and wrong. And what's going to happen after you die?
Then you've got Hinduism with reincarnation. Your soul gets reborn into a new body over and over again, depending on how you lived your previous life.
And it keeps going until you reach this state called moksha. That's when you're free from suffering.
It's a totally different way of thinking about the afterlife.
But it shows how much people want to understand death and find meaning in life, even after it's over.
Riker doesn't ignore the skeptics either. He knows there's no scientific proof for any of this afterlife stuff.
But he also says that doesn't mean it's not important. These beliefs give people comfort and hope.
Another interesting part is about miracles.
Oh yeah, he goes into all the different kinds. Healings, resurrections, visions, prophecies.
He looks at the evidence for each one and says a lot of them can be explained by science or psychology.
He even talks about the placebo effect, where just believing something can make you feel better.
But he doesn't rule out the possibility that some stuff is just beyond what we know.
Like maybe there's more to reality than we can understand right now.
He also talks about why miracles are important.
Like how they can strengthen faith, give people hope, and bring communities together.
Right, even if you can't prove it scientifically, believing in a miracle can change your life.
So we've got the afterlife, miracles. But Riker also gets into this huge question, the relationship between God and science.
Yeah, one of the biggest debates is creationism versus evolution.
It seems like it always divides people.
But Riker doesn't pick sides.
He lays out the scientific evidence for evolution, but he also says maybe God had something to do with it.
He talks about intelligent design, the idea that some things in nature are just too complex to happen randomly.
Like it points to some kind of designer.
Who could be God?
Riker also says maybe God created the universe and its laws. and then let evolution do its thing.
That's a cool idea, trying to bring science and religion together.
He also talks about the anthropic principle, that the universe seems perfectly set up for life to exist.
Like it was meant to be this way.
It really makes you think about our place in the universe.
And while Riker doesn't have all the answers, he wants people to think about these questions and be open to different ideas.
He also explores how religion has shaped morality and ethics, like all the different rules and codes from different religions.
Like the 10 Commandments, the Eightfold Path.
He also talks about natural law.
The idea that there are universal moral rules built into human nature, and we can figure them out through reason.
He says religion can help us be good people, but it's not just about following rules blindly.
It's about developing good quality, compassion, empathy, fairness.
It's interesting how this connects back to his worries about cultural Marxism. He thinks getting rid of traditional religion will lead to less morality.
And more chaos in society.
It's a big part of his argument.
He thinks religion is what made Western civilization great, and losing it will have bad consequences.
It's something to think about.
Definitely. Whether you agree with him or not, it's a good conversation to have about the role of religion in the world today.
I also liked what he said about religion and art. He shows how religion inspired some of the greatest works of art.
Like Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel, Bach's music.
He also explains how religion shaped different art styles.
Like the Gothic cathedrals, they were built to make you feel awe and wonder.
And he looks at literature too,
From ancient epics to modern novels.
showing how they deal with the big questions of life.
Faith, doubt, suffering, redemption.
Stuff that's still relevant today.
It shows how powerful religion has been for creativity.
And it still inspires artists today. Riker also gets into the connection between God and personal experience, like how people try to understand the divine through mystical stuff and spiritual practice.
He talks about the numinous, that feeling of awe you get when you experience something sacred.
He also looks at different ways people connect with the divine.
Like prayer, meditation, ritual.
It reminds you that religion isn't just about belief.
It's about how you live your life.
How you deal with the mysteries of existence. And Riker doesn't avoid the hard parts of faith either.
He knows there's a lot of suffering and bad stuff in the world.
And he looks at how people deal with that when they believe in God.
Problem of evil.
How can a good and powerful God let bad things happen?
He talks about different explanations.
Like free will, or the idea that God suffers with us,
He also shows how faith can give people comfort and hope.
even when things are really tough. You know, what's really cool is that Riker doesn't see religion as like one thing. He knows there are so many different beliefs and practices.
Yeah, he says the idea of God is always changing. It reflects how humanity changes and understands things differently.
It's a living tradition, not just some old relic.
And it's still shaping and being shaped by the world around us.
Man, we've talked about a lot in this deep dive into the gods among us. Like from those old Sumerian gods to all this stuff about the Abrahamic faiths, the afterlife miracles, even that cultural Marxism thing.
Yeah, Riker covers a ton in this book.
He really does. You know, one thing I keep thinking about is how the idea of God has changed so much, like over and over again through history.
It's definitely not a fixed thing. It's always evolved. Like as culture changes, science discovers new stuff, philosophy comes up with new ideas.
It makes me wonder, like, what's going to happen to God in the future? What new stuff will we have to deal with? And how will our beliefs change?
That's a great question. I mean, look around. Technology's going crazy. Society's all messed up. More and more people aren't religious. All that's going to affect how we think about God, for sure.
Riker talks about this rise of non-theistic spirituality, people finding meaning and purpose outside of regular religion.
Yeah, it's like a do-it-yourself spirituality.
Yeah.
People want something real, something personal.
Not just following rules or accepting what they're told.
But even with all that change, I think people will always ask the same big question. You know, what's the point of it all? Why are we here? Is there something more?
Totally. Whether we find answers in religion, some other spirituality, or just figuring it out ourselves, that search for meaning is like part of being human.
And Riker really emphasizes how important religion was for the West. He says it gave us morals, a sense of community, inspiration for art and music and literature.
And he's worried that if religion keeps declining, we'll lose those values and society will fall apart.
It's a real concern. Even if you don't buy the whole cultural Marxism thing, it's obvious that religion is changing. And it's worth thinking about what that means for us.
What I like about Riker is that he doesn't shy away from tough questions. He just dives right into controversial stuff. And he wants you to think critically about what you believe.
Totally. He doesn't give easy answers, but he helps you understand how complicated religion is and how much it's affected us.
I think that's what makes The Gods Among Us such a great book. It makes you question your own ideas, look at things from different angles, and keep thinking about what role God plays in our lives and in the world.
It's one of those books that sticks with you. You keep asking questions and trying to understand more.
So if you're interested in exploring these ideas, definitely check out The Gods Among Us, an unfiltered revelation by Conrad Riker. You can find it on Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books.
It's a really interesting read. It'll make you think about things in a whole new way.
And that's it for our deep dive into the gods among us. Thanks for listening. And may your own search for understanding be full of amazing discoveries.